Hi, Srimati. Am I audible?
Yes, Tonisha. Good afternoon. Or
Good
good
afternoon.
evening, I guess.
Hi. May I trouble you to share the PPT? We have a number of windows open with YouTube Live and everything. So it'll be a little easier if somebody else handles that.
So you want me to share the PPT and बने, change the slides? Okay,
Yes,
let
please.
me
If that's
first then give it a try. Okay, let me download the PPT. Wait. Okay, you've shared through Drive. Okay, I'll try to share it now. Share. What do I do? Screen, I think, right?
Hello, Pooja. It's a pleasure to see the attendees here. Finally, we are so sorry for last time. We'll start shortly. As you know, the session is supposed to start from 5, so it'll be unfair to start before time. Meanwhile, the live stream is on. You should be able to access that as well. If there are any concerns, please use the chat. Hi, Sam. Hello to everyone. It's a pleasure to be able to see you.
Tonisha, is anything being shared?
It is being shared, but not the full screen version of it.
I can't go back to the meeting.
I think she's sharing Drive, right?
Yes,
She's
because I
sharing
couldn't
Drive.
find. Achha, wait. I'll try again.
Okay. Maybe is this visible? Is this all right?
Yes, yes. This is visible.
Yeah,
This is
but
visible, right?
yes,
Yes, yes.
yes.
I don't want to do it myself because hi Srimati, am I audible?
Yes, yes, yes.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. May I trouble you to share the PPT? We have a number of windows open with YouTube Live and everything. So it will be a little easier if somebody else handles that.
So you want me to share the PPT and change the slides? This is the recording. This is a conversation between me and you, right? Am I audible, Tonisha?
Yes, you are. That is the window kahan gaya? Yeah. Okay. So where should I go? वेटेक्स बंद हो गया था या यहाँ आ गया? ओके
Okay. So what would it be, Tonisha? Would it be you or me?
Srimati, I think it will be easier if you share it because, as I said, this is the main window from which a lot of other things are going on.
Acha. Okay,
Like
I'll
I
try
can't
to do
keep
it
track
again.
of
I
those if I
have
just go full screen.
I have your PPT
Yes.
on my window. Okay, so if I want to share it from my window, I should go to what? A screen, I
Go
think.
to share.
Yes,
You
I've
will
gone
see
to
the
share.
yes.
Share it from screen or application? Sharing from screen, I
Sharing from
suppose.
application. Screen or
Application.
application. Click on that.
Okay, I have gone there and then I choose window. Yes, now it is coming. Last time it was not coming. Is it showing?
Yes, it is showing. Great. Thank
If
you.
I go full screen,
Yes.
and Tonisha, just let me know when to change the slide.
Yes, yes, I'll do that. I
Okay.
thankfully don't have too many slides, so it'll not
Okay.
be very
I'll
disruptive.
stop sharing now. We'll start at 5 or whenever we start with the talk, that is.
Yes, yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. Can somebody check? I hope the live stream is accessible for everybody.
Yes, Tonisha. It's
Great.
streamed live.
Varvi.
জয়েন শুনতে পাওয়া যাচ্ছে?
Ha, শুনতে পাওয়া যাচ্ছে.
ওকে।
Let me figure out my audio.
Hello, we are able to see everyone's greetings in the chat box. Thank you so much. You have been an amazing group to work with. Especially after last week, we were very scared about how things will take up, but the response has been amazing and it has sustained itself over the first session and when we sent the video recording. So we can't thank you enough. We will start in another 10 minutes or so. We are all set. You have the link to the Google form. We are taking questions only through the Google form because nearly 1,000 people are watching. More than 1,000 people are in this virtual room. And it will be very confusing or chaotic to take questions through the chat box. So if you have questions or comments throughout the session, please use the Google form that has been shared with you along with the meeting link.
Hello.
Hello. It's good to meet everyone.
Yeah, thanks. Same here. Today, so many is joining. Thank God.
Tonisha, meet your chair for the day.
Oh,
Dr. Riddhi
a
Bhattacharya.
pleasure. So Riddhi will be, is it okay if I call you Riddhi?
Please do.
So Riddhi will be handling the form,
Yeah,
Srimati?
Yes, yes.
I'll do that.
Oh, all right.
Tonisha, would the YouTube comment box be on or off?
The YouTube comments are disabled
Yes.
because we
Okay.
can't keep track of three different
Absolutely. Yes.
platforms. Yes.
I would have
It'll be easier to,
suggested the same. Yes.
So
yes.
I'm not opening the YouTube
No,
comment.
no, no, no. And we will request all the participants to stick to the Google form only
Yeah.
Please start recording.
and also stay off the WebEx chat box as far as possible.
Itself. So यहाँ से अलग से my confidence in my digital skills have plummeted. So I am sitting with our technical support person here. Sunil ji is here and he has been supporting us through this.
Thank you so much, Sunilji. We hope that this time nothing goes wrong and we are off like a, you know, like Chandrayaan 3, I would say. That is the talk of the town. So we'll start right at 5. I'll take it up and we can start from there. Shamrata, have you joined? Can you hear me? Our IQC coordinator has joined, but I guess he can't answer.
Srimati, do you want to start in the next 2-3 minutes?
Absolutely, yes. It is it is 4:55 now, so we'll start sharp at 5.
Hello, Barbie. Hi. All the best, Onisha.
We will start in 3 minutes. All right, I think we can start if everyone is ready. Yeah. Okay. So once again, uh, I welcome everyone to the second day of the online International Faculty Development Program on Digital Humanities and Introduction. This is the first collaboration between Scottish Church College, Kolkata and IIT Jodhpur MOU. I am Dr. Shubham Guha Thakurta, Associate Professor of History, Scottish Church College, and one of the joint coordinators of this FDP. I have with me also my joint coordinators, Dr. Barbie Roy, Associate Professor, Department of Philosophy, Scottish Church College, and our speaker for the day is our other joint coordinator, Dr. Tonisha Gui from IIT Jodhpur. She will be formally introduced, so I'll leave it to Dr. Roy for a later time. But before we begin, I think on behalf of the two institutions and the joint coordinators, we owe our participants a sincere apology for the technical glitches that happened on the first day. And if you have gone through the recording, you would have understood that we did our best, but we couldn't really figure it out in the time that we had. But we decided that the show must go on. So we recorded the session. We had the speaker give a brilliant introduction, I believe, to digital humanities, setting up a perfect foundation, for what we wish to achieve in this FDP. That is, learn more about the concept of digital humanities, both against the context of research as well as a new pedagogy, I believe. Today, we have with us Dr. Guin as our second speaker, and we are very, very excited for her session. And I also thank all our participants who have stood by us and who have joined us today and who have believed that they will learn something or the other from this particular FTP, and thus is with us. I can see that already we've crossed the number 100 in the WebEx platform, and many, I think, is also watching us from the YouTube. So a very, very big thank you to all of you for sticking by us and for being with us. And again, a big welcome to all of you. Because we couldn't have you live with us for the first session, we have already sent you the recording for the first session. And along with it, we've already sent you a feedback form for the first session. Kindly, please fill that up. And we've also sent you a small questionnaire. Because we had mentioned in the brochure that we would like to ensure attendance for all the sessions to issue certificates. So since we could not have you live for the first session, filling up of that brochure, of that questionnaire is a kind of a compulsion now on your part if you wish to receive the certificate, a completion certificate of this particular international online FTP. Today also, right at the end of this session, I will be sharing, or rather one of us will be sharing the link for today's feedback form in the WebEx chat box. Again, kindly fill that out because that will be considered as attendance for today's session. Also, since we are dealing with huge numbers, don't get me wrong, we are extremely honored and inspired by the sheer number of people who have registered for this FDP, but the number is also quite frightening and daunting for us. So we have been trying to figure out how best to arrange it and how best to have smooth sessions. And thus we have come up with the idea, thanks to Tonisha, to have a Google form to submit your specific questions for the sessions. The comment box in the YouTube is disabled, as you can see, so we won't be looking at it at all. And for the benefit of our chair for today's session, we won't like her to go to and fro from various sources from where the questions might be coming. So if you are a registered attendee, then in the mail that we have sent for today's session, you will see a link for a Google form, and we will be answering or taking questions only through that particular Google form. Please keep this in mind. And also, please try to keep the chat box of WebEx clean as well, because if necessary, then we might post that Google form link in the chat box. But if you keep chatting, then it might get lost. So I wish that all of you will cooperate with us so that we can have a smooth running of today's session. And again, a big thank you to all our attendees and participants to stand by us and to come back on the second day and to attend the session live. I would now like to request Dr. Varvi Roy, my co-coordinator, to kindly introduce the speaker formally. After her introduction, I request the chair for today's session, Dr. Riddhi Bhattacharya. She is an assistant professor of history, Scottish Church College, as well as the convener for Scottish Church College Peace Studies Cell, and a very, very dear friend who has agreed kindly to chair today's session. So, welcome, Riddhi, and thank you for doing this. Once Dr. Roy is done with her introduction, I would request you to kindly take over and to run through the entire lecture along with the question and answer session. And after that, I'll come back to bring the session to an end. So, over to you, Arvi.
Thank you, Shrimoy. Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Okay. So, as Shrimoy just mentioned, it's a pleasure to introduce today's speaker, considering the fact that we three were working together for the last 4-5 months to make this FDP happen. And I feel like I am introducing a friend of mine. So, uh, trained in English literary and cultural studies, Tonisha's academic interests lie at the intersections of identity studies, spatiality, and knowledge systems in the global south. She has studied at EFL University, Hyderabad. Her doctoral research looked at mainstream Bhadralok identity formation around Bodo Bajar, Kolkata. She joined School of Liberal Arts IIT, Jodhpur, as an assistant professor in July 2022 and has been affiliated with the IDRP of Digital Humanities. She teaches undergraduate, postgraduate, and doctoral courses like Digital Society, New Media Studies, and Sociology of Media. Within digital humanities, her areas of interest are digital identities, subjectivities, digital communities, digital popular culture, digital archiving, politics of representation archiving in digital media in the global south, and digital feminism. So we are all looking forward to your lecture, Tonisha. Now over to you, Riddhi.
So, Bharti, good evening, all of you. I welcome you all. Tonisha, how much time will you take for the lecture?
I have planned for a roughly 90 to 100-minute thing, and then we can take questions.
Okay, do you want me to remind you of the time 10 minutes before?
I think I'm good.
Okay. And as far as the questions are concerned, kindly participants and attendees, please fill up the Google form, whatever questions you have, and I'll put them over to Tonisha. Now, over to Tonisha.
Thank you, Riddhi. I hope I'm audible. Yes? Great. First of all, hi. It's so good to meet everyone. It's great that we are finally able to share this virtual room. Srimoidi couldn't have said it better. It has been wonderful to see the kind of response that we have received. It's humbling to see the interest that you have shown and how you have sustained it over the last week, despite the hiccups. We are very grateful. Now, in today's talk, you may have looked at the title. I will start with a sentence that's fairly simple. We live in digital cultures. I think everyone in the digital room would agree with me when I say that the internet, the personal computer, and the smartphone have revolutionized everything from leisure, entertainment to work. Typically, people tend to take very polarized stances about this. There are groups that say that virtual reality is making real society more disconnected. I'm sure you have read at least one opinion piece like this in the newspaper. There is the other end of it, where digitality and communication technology is closely associated with progress, modernity, development, sometimes in very uncritical ways. For the next 90 or so minutes, I need you to suspend these biases, whatever they might be. Because while neither is a lie, lived experience is more complex than that. Shimoidi, I think we can move to the next slide. In today's session, I'm trying to do three things that are at once very simple and very difficult to do in 2 hours. First, we'll talk about the socio-cultural implications of quote-unquote doing DH, especially in our current space-time. Second, we'll talk about the ways in which digital cultures may be theorized and the methodologies that come with them. And third, we'll talk about what it means to
I'm
be...
sorry to interrupt. Actually, the
Yes.
slides are not go for that.
The slides don't need to move. Are they? If they have reached the second slide, we are good.
No.
It is still in the first is handling the slides.
Okay.
She can perhaps, yes. Great.
Okay.
And third, finally, we'll talk about what it means to be a digitized academic. What does it mean to be an academic within digital cultures in terms of both the theory of it, as I mentioned in point 2, and the practices of it in ordinary everyday life. We can move on to the next one. So, as I said, we live in digital cultures. I hope everyone can see the radish and everyone can see the Indian flag with the vegetables. So, by saying this, I don't mean to ignore the problems around access, digital divides, digital literacy concerns. Different societies access and use digital resources in different ways. Different kinds of digital tools and interfaces are available at different locations. Digital cultures are deeply heterogeneous, but they are not limited to only what are known as developed nations or only techno-positive domains. I'm saying this outright in the very beginning for two reasons. First, I want you to resist this idea that there is an isolated elite group who are digital and not elite groups that are not. I don't know if you've heard of films like the documentary made on Khabar Lahariya, or the flag that you can see there, where obviously somebody has used vegetables that they are also selling to make the Tiranga as a part of the Har Ghar Tiranga program that happened last year and this year on the Indian. Now, it is one thing to do jugaad or making do. It is another thing to have that image taken and circulated through a platform like LinkedIn from where I screen grabbed it by somebody like this with a content title like the one that you can see, right? I'm not ignoring inequalities. All consume and participate in digital cultures. And because we do so, and if words like digital divide are important to us, it is all the more important to not create rigid binaries of people who do digital culture and people who don't. It is a lot more rewarding to see how digital access or disenfranchisements act within broader socio-cultural networks or intersections of identities, interactions, meaning making. The very fact that that photo has made it to LinkedIn means that the person who has made that flag or the person who has taken that photo are already a part of a digital conversation. But at the same time, of course, you might have to ask whether somebody like that would have a LinkedIn account. Second, like any other socio-cultural entity, digital spheres are also open to hierarchies of privilege or sophistication. They can also be exploited or lead to problematic stances or create new forms of gatekeeping. Just as they can do this, they're also open to what we call jugaad or making do. Using something, especially in a resource deficit situation, to make it work in mirrored ways, including but not limited to its original goal or task. It is comparable to the distinction between a trained architect's building plans and how a mason or gharani, especially of kacha mud houses, works. The first one has formal strategies. The other, like Michel de Certeau would say, has tactics. And studying both is equally important. Think of the WhatsApp groups run by women entrepreneurs of saris, pickles, cakes from their homes, or how long before Facebook Marketplace was formally introduced, a lot of people were buying and selling goods and services using social media. The digital economy is not just about Amazon or Flipkart. It is also about these informal users. Education, including private tuitions, in a very big way used digital interfaces as much as possible during the pandemic. Huge support networks were sustained through private WhatsApp and other messenger groups during the pandemic. Acts of criticism have taken the form of memes and Facebook or Twitter hashtags. In other words, if culture is about ordinary, everyday meaning-making practices, as my discipline would propose. Digital cultures have added, continued, transformed, hybridized, pre-digital meaning-making practices in such big and small ways that they give rise to new kinds of research questions and methodologies. In the previous session, somebody talked about digital divide. Now, it would be very reductive, simplistic, think that just because a society like India is so diverse, has such technological unevenness, DH should only be studied in countries which may appear technologically more advanced or equal, which incidentally, a lot of so-called first world countries are not. Despite digital disenfranchisement, we are studying DH, which is relevant to only a fraction of the population, is not a well thought out stance. In fact, especially because such diverse social groups use digital tools in such pluriversal ways, in the most ordinary to the most exceptional tasks, makes it very, very crucial to use and study DH in the global south. It is more useful to access, discuss, talk about lived realities of being in a digital culture if one breaks away from a very limited understanding of digital as only elite or only technical. It does not erase the ways in which it is a resource and a prestige marker, but it allows for a more nuanced or comprehensive way of looking at things. This is also very, very important to note because in the domains of humanities and social sciences, we typically work on themes of socio-cultural interactions, transactions, issues of social inequity. We may have different methodologies, but we discuss themes, problems, rooted in a sense of lived practices and often social justice. If we don't look at our contemporary society in this way, by saying that we all live in digital cultures, we won't be able to address new problematics created in the wake of digital interaction. Intersectionally speaking, if any individual experiences discrimination or privilege at the intersections of caste, class, gender, linguistic, and ethnographic identities, sexualities, age, race, and other similar parameters, insofar as any individual at any given moment occupies multiple subject positions or identity labels that don't just work separately but affect each other, in an identical situation, for example, a child may be a little more vulnerable than an adult, or a Dalit woman may be more vulnerable than a Dalit man or a high caste woman. Digital resources in this conversation add to the disenfranchisement or amplify the privilege. If someone is in an already vulnerable place, not being able to access digital resources add to their vulnerability, and vice versa. Despite this, talking about digital cultures from the global south, the majority worlds, as some people call post-colonial societies, comes with a sense of defiance, almost as if it is too elitist or not normal enough. That's why, if it is asked, as it often is, in terms of inequities, that why anyone should do DH in a society that has so much digital divide, disenfranchisement, disparity, inequality, when it comes to accessing digital resources, it is a valid question, but it also needs to be problematized. Scholars of history, literature, sociology present here may be aware of what Dipesh Chakraborty called the waiting room of history. This commonsensical idea that the developed world is the most modern, the developing and underdeveloped or third world nations are in the process of becoming modern. They haven't reached modernity, almost like it's a destination in a game or a race. Technology is very closely associated with the shared sense of modernity. Digital disenfranchisements and ways of coping with them are all the more reason why we live in very heterogeneous digital cultures that need to be studied. We can't treat technology, here digitality, as divorced from, alien to our lived cultures. If we do, we run the risk of polarizing it. Both the statements that technology will solve all our problems and technology is our biggest enemy are problematic oversimplifications. Science and technology is not outside culture and therefore cultural theory. We access science and technology through culturally mediated processes. Now, preaching this conceptually, theoretically is easy. Practicing it is a little more difficult. I will give you a very ordinary, easy example. I think we can move on to the next slide. You may have noticed in the video of the last session that it has not been edited, despite how the actual session starts at the 46th minute. Now, were we not aware of it? We obviously were. One of the participants had written in the feedback that the video should have been edited, which is absolutely fair. And I'm sure a number of you will agree with them. They finished this sentence by saying that it is ironic, especially given how this is an FDP on digital humanities. Again, fair, but also very important for us. And this is not an attempt to malign or blame them. Please understand this. How can one make sense of this? There could be multiple reasons for not editing the video. Maybe we thought that because this is pedagogical material recorded in real time, it is important to maintain the transparency with the participants about the whole session, even if it makes us look bad or inefficient. Digital information is always mediated, and there has been a huge body of criticism and distrust about top-down handing out of any media, of photoshopping or footage editing or gatekeeping content, telling something only selectively, editing out bits of narrative that don't fit in the grand scheme of things. Maybe we just wanted to avoid these assumptions, or as people who talk about politics of representation or politics of art, we are extra sensitive about our practices. Maybe we tried cropping and realized that it is affecting the content and quality of the video. That a more sophisticated editing tool that would crop it while maintaining audio and video quality would make it a much bigger file that will be all the more difficult to download. I am, aware of the diverse locations from which participants are accessing this FTP. We did not want to assume good internet bandwidth exists everywhere in the exact same way. It turned out to be a good guess because I received around a dozen emails about how the current video was buffering too much. When participants tried streaming it and I suggested downloading, which thankfully worked. Imagine doing that for an even bigger file. How much more difficult it would have been for so many more people. In lived experience, practically speaking, this is what digital heterogeneity inequities may look like. They may feed into pre-existing situations like income, location, language, but they may also run in excess to them. You can't always equalize one privilege to another, especially when it comes to digital access. Or, you can just assume that we were lazy. Doesn't matter, we won't mind. However, notice the second part of that sentence, that not editing is ironic, especially given how this is an FDP on digital humanities. Again, most of us would agree. I know that my institute has the word technology in its name, so I might have agreed. Even as we do so, it's very, very important to notice the presupposition or bias there. It almost seems to suggest that you can only be a digital humanities scholar, teacher, resource person if you have a particular skill set, a particular degree, if you're tech savvy or speak computing jargon, know words like data and programming. It's almost like you have to pass a test, qualify a level, elitist, STEM-centric, or otherwise very exclusive nonetheless, to study digital cultures. And this bias is a lot more insidious and harmful than you may think. A lot of doing DH in the global south is about problematizing, challenging, subverting this bias. You may have noticed this in the vehemence or emotion with which the previous session's instructor spoke at times, almost like he's fighting a case. If you remember nothing else from FDP, remember this attitude or this resistance, please. Therefore, we live in digital cultures. Digital cultures are deeply heterogeneous. They are also, as I like to say in any new media studies or digital humanities classroom I am, inversive, or at least open to inversive practices, even as they may be very institutional, formal, or centralized. Remember the tiranga that you just saw with vegetables. On one hand, it is pointing at resourcefulness in a situation where buying a flag is an extra expense that the maker can't afford, but at the same time wants to participate in a shared activity that is collective, community centric. At the same time, it is being highlighted, represented, circulated through a very professional and therefore presumably white collar and relatively elite group of people. So what may look disenfranchised may be subverted and become elite. Different methods and media through which content passes adds to the content, and this is something that we need to be aware of. Why did I spend so much time talking about these tiny, trivial things? I just gave you an example in the process of how critical analysis works. You look at an event, an utterance, an action, an attitude, no matter how exceptional or ordinary it may look like, and you try to explain it on the basis of a conceptual framework and or in terms of the context and other broader networks of meaning within which it is located. When I was introduced so kindly by Varbiti, you may have noticed the word knowledge systems. We have an attitude that extraordinary or big events are the ones that need to be studied. Ordinary everyday life actions, comments, so-called commonsensical attitudes are background trivia to big economic, political, or cultural watershed movements. I'd like to propose to you that not only are they not unimportant, the small moments, actions, utterances, biases constitute huge socio-political events or actions. So when we say knowledge systems, only some of those systems may be formalized, recorded, annotated, archived, digitally accessible. A huge body of them may be informal, oral, invisible in mainstream representations, but existing nonetheless, or existing in not high prestige ways, even within digital networks. One of the reasons why digital humanities fascinates me is in the way in which it brings the focus sharply to the minute, the ordinary, the everyday. Huge cancel cultures or bans or withdrawing of major expensive, economically significant advertisement campaigns are framed around one hashtag, one trending opinion on Twitter. Big data, and we will talk about it a little later, is rooted in studying patterns or trends across thousands of individual actions or opinions, or that very ambiguous and heavy word, cultural tastes. Again, cannot be qualified purely in terms of income, education, language. Also, in using that comment as an example here, I am obviously not criticizing it, insofar as criticism is commonly assumed to be a negative opinion. Within the humanities and social sciences, we know that to do critique is to critically engage with the contexts and the assumptions that make a comment like this happen in the field. I don't know if you have noticed, but for the last 15 odd minutes or so, I have been talking about theory and its uses. Now, how does one study the age? I think we are ready for the next slide. By its very definition, it is interdisciplinary, and sociocultural practices are so wide in range that it may appear at once too unrelated to each other and too diverse. This is the paradox of the age. It is at once too universal and yet too esoteric or eclectic. What does a data scientist have in common with a film critic? They have such different methods, such different training, and look at such different kinds of texts. However, just because something is popular or widely used doesn't make it universal or random. When a box office success of a film is reported on digital media and YouTube film reviews affect how much money it will change hands for a film to be streamed on OTT, or how many people will trash it, critique it, or love it. Not only the data scientist watching these trends or the film critic analyzing the composition of the film, but a whole lot of other discipline experts find it a very relevant and useful site to look at. This was just an example. Of course, so many different kinds of activities that digitality is used in different ways in different contexts, and context sensitivity is very, very crucial for us. Within them, I see three kinds of research happening, very broadly speaking. First, there are cultural acts, things that continue into the digital from non-digital acts, objects, processes. Think of the way in which we have always, for as long as we can remember, had concepts like friendship, enmity, rivalry. Of course, social media friendships both continue these ideas or these concepts even as they transform them. Cyberbullying is not equal to bullying. There are particular acts or different kinds of violence that go into cyberbullying that can be as effective, more effective, extremely harmful, at par with physical acts of violence, which is why it needed to be recognized, right? And legalized or codified within legal systems. Another very easy example to give, especially in South Asian context, is of course the notion of arranged marriage. Now, matchmaking, matchmakers, the institution of matchmakers have existed in different South Asian cultures in very different ways. But of course, Shadi.com both draws on them, even as it changes them, and not just because it is available on the internet as an application. It changes certain attitudes. It tries to promote a particular understanding about what its ideal target consumer looks like, how they would like to talk about, what kind of ad campaigns it is going to go into. So things that have always existed, but once they enter the digital domain, transform, mutate, change in certain ways, even as they continue certain shared commonalities, right? The second are things peculiar to the digital, like cybernetics, cyborg, code space, presumption. I'll explain these words. As part of the digital knowledge economy of circulation and recursion, once digital data are generated, they regenerate other data and others link to each other. So the word presumption refers to this very curious situation where in the act of producing content or producing a good or service digitally, one is simultaneously consuming it. There is no differentiated act between once one is acting as a producer and then separately in a different context, one is acting as a consumer. It is happening simultaneously. An example of that, again, would very easily be social media. I don't know if you have heard of it, but there have been huge debates around data privacy and social media content. And somebody had very famously said that if you're not paying for a service, you're not the consumer, you're the product. So you must have heard of situations where in sharing content, you're both expressing, you're using a platform like Facebook or Instagram or Twitter, and therefore you're consuming it, you're using the platform to share your opinion. But in the very act of consuming it, you're creating something that will be assessed, tracked, recorded, circulated, might be popular enough to get the platform advertisements and therefore generate revenue. And therefore, the word presumption is this very important coinage that couldn't have worked in the same way in a pre-digital situation, right? That's why I've said that it's one of the things peculiar to the digital. Cybernetics means a whole range of things. I would not be an expert person talking about a lot of them, but it basically, among other things, looks at situations where You know how typically we look at social systems and we try to extrapolate those logical frameworks and apply them to machines. So we have words like the state machinery, or we have descriptions like mouse, where the computer mouse apparently looks like the animal mouse, right? Cybernetics has reached a point where it starts doing it the other way around, where it looks at how machines work or how computing and programming works. And on the basis of the logic or conceptual framework on the principle of which it is running, it tries to extrapolate that information or that logic and says, is this how society also functions? So instead of culture preceding science, we are reaching a place where we are extrapolating scientific, computing, technical concepts to understand sociocultural behaviors. Again, difficult to do in a pre-digital or pre-new media space. Cyborg, you may have heard of. The word cyborg basically refers to a situation where somebody is part human and part machine, right? I'm not being able to look at any comments, so I'm assuming Riddhi and Srimoidi are going to take care of that. So initially, the word cyborg came into our social imaginaries as this aberration, this perversion practically. You don't have to be a student of humanities or English literature to have heard of Frankenstein's monster, right? Uh, Perverse, aberrant, not dead, not alive, human, sentient creature who was revitalized by science, who is surviving with the help of machinery. And we have seen this across superhero films. Think of the way in which most superhero films like Spider-Man has villains like Dr. Octavius, who's a mechanized octopus from what one could see, or the way in which Bucky Barnes in Captain America, the Marvel universe. One part of the fact that he is working for villains is very quietly the fact that he has a mechanized arm and all that gadgetry around himself. That's how the idea of the cyborg began. And of course, Donna Haraway has done wonderful work on it and practically revised the whole concept. But if you think of today's scenario, this idea of somebody being part human, part machine is not only not that rare or horrifying, it is an inevitable and ordinary fact of life across a very wide range of people. Think of the way in which we use earphones and smartphones. Think of Fitbits. Think of the way in which pacemakers or stents are implanted in people's hearts. This idea of the cyborg as something distinctly alienating, human yet non-human, this discomfort has gone over time. Another example of this, the final one before I move forward from this, is that of code space. Now, typically, when we think of the word space or spatiality, we think of a physical, material, tangible, locational thing in our heads. Space is not like software that, in any computer classroom, you're told that you can't see, but it is there and it works. Space cannot be imagined. Space can have symbolic values or associations, but it can't be imagined. It has to exist somewhere. There is always a reference to a physical entity, location. That is how we typically think of the word space. But because of the way in which virtual communities, virtual realities, augmented reality in gaming and other different kinds of community cultures have worked out, we have had to come up with something like code space, where the code oblique space is deliberately put together in that way to talk about situations or spaces that do not exist out there, outside the digital space. Code here refers to the programming code, obviously. That's the computing language that has gone into creating that virtual space. If you think of the way in which gaming cultures, especially shared gaming cultures, when people play a video game together from different locations, or you work on your application, or a virtual meeting room like this one, where does it exist? Somewhere in the ether out there, because clearly we are not physically sharing the same space, and yet we are sharing the conversation. Virtually, we are sharing a room. When it comes to situations like this, code space comes forward because neither the concept of code or coding nor the concept of space in its typical conventional meaning can capture this conflation, this coexistence of one creating the other, right? Prosumers continually create new or modified versions of data in never-ending cycles, including creating new metadata. And we'll talk about that in a bit when we go on to the third aspect, which is very important, which is using digital tools to access or process data or information. Algorithms and practices of classification play important roles in structuring and shaping the ways in which online content is used and discovered. They serve to identify some content as relevant and ignore others, personalize them sometimes to users' preferences, while users' practices and tagging of others' contents serves as another way of making research interests, academia, more or less visible to others, and making some connections between topics and writers while excluding others that are equally valid. The use of predictive algorithms of the types that are employed by Amazon and Google may be looked at as boons or curses. Do they create echo chambers that can be very insular? Or do they promote participatory democracies where everyone has an equal right to share them? Both true, neither the only truth that is out there. In this situation, the third way in which digital research happens, or research in digital humanities happens, it has to do with data harvesting, web scraping, digital archiving. Big data refers to the enormous data sets that social media platforms and search engines like Facebook and Google collect, both on a very individual and in huge batches of individual users at both these scales. And that data is then used to track trends or patterns of social behavior. From the kind of advertisement you will get to see the next time you open YouTube, right after chatting with a friend on WhatsApp about buying something, which happens to everyone here, don't lie, the kind of products you'll be suggested when you look for a similar or similar sounding one. One of the following sessions will address the question of data analytics and quantitative research in the digital humanities in much greater detail. Till then, please note, data science or data analytics is one part of digital humanities. It is not equal to the whole sum of DH. A lot of people sometimes use them synonymously, and you need to be a little careful about that. Different people explain these three broad trajectories in different ways. I am trained in media and cultural studies. And the way in which I make sense of them is with the use of the notion of meaning making. Shimoidi, if you can have the next slide, please. I hope everyone can see the slide with meaning making visible. Huge letters. That's where we are. Despite their apparent differences, they're connected by all these three very broad, very diverse domains that I just outlined. They share the common goals of investing how, what, and by whom meaning making happens digitally. Now, there are different words that are used to talk about digital cultures. Digital society, information society, knowledge society, post-industrial society, post-modern society, cyber culture, and we could have 1-hour sessions on each of these words alone, which aren't, of course, within the session. But while they all have their own specificities, they all share a sense of shared networks. Networks where meaning is produced, circulated, and consumed in different ways. Networks that emphasize on relationality, interconnectedness. The digital as a tool, a medium of communication, of meaning making, becomes a site for social and cultural activities and therefore a site of social cultural research. It follows the same logic or parameters of a cultural site where meanings are both reproduced and produced. If anyone is familiar with Stuart Hall and his understanding of representation or constructionism, you will be able to join the dots here. If you aren't, it doesn't matter. Now, I think we are ready for the next slide. I will outline some of the very popular or broad ways in which people have looked at or tried theorizing about digital cultures. First, we have obviously the emphasis on network society with Manuel Castells. I'll just give me a minute. Yes, we are on the right slide. Thank you. I'm sorry, we are also tracking live stream and everything, so I need to check that things are going from time to time. So Manuel Castells is one deeply influential scholar of digital networks. He coined the term network society as expressed in several books and articles, and positions network as the basis for contemporary society's structure and power relations. In what Castells characterizes as the information age, industrial processes have been superseded by electronic communications facilitated by the new information technologies. Power is now multidimensional, residing in networks such as the global financial, political, military, security, information production, criminal and multimedia networks. All these networks are involved in defining the rules and norms of societies. Castells asserts that digitally mediated information has become key to economic productivity. Knowledge-based information technologies produce even more knowledge and information, contributing to a new information-based economy that is dispersed globally and is highly interconnected, using digital and other networking technologies and practices. According to Castells, digital technologies such as social media have played a major role in creating new social structure, global economy, and a new virtual culture. His work has led the way in acknowledging the importance of these technologies in contemporary social formations. Some other scholars like Baer and Featherstone, Lash, Mackenzie, Savage have suggested that digital technologies have changed the ways in which economic value is produced and distributed, and commodities are circulated, conceptualized. According to them, knowledge itself has become transformed via these processes. For example, Vaidyanathan coined the term Googleization or Googieization, depending on how you choose to pronounce it. And it has been used to describe the ways in which the Google company has expanded its influence into many domains of social, economic, and political life. Google is viewed as exerting a powerful effect, not only on the ways in which search engines operate and the aesthetics of platforms and apps, but also education, academia, information services, social research, advertising, geographic services, email, publishing, and web commerce. I don't think I will need to convince you of this. Many commercial and government agencies and organizations now collect and use digital data as a part of their operation. A digital data economy has developed, built on techniques of accessing digital data from the various archives in which they are stored for commercial purposes. Where once it was the physical labor of workers that produced surplus value, and I am referring to leftist theory, now the intellectual labor of the masses has monetary value, constituting a new information economy in which thought has become reified, public, and commodified. I am assuming you're aware of influencers and how influencing is an entire profession by now, where influencers review, create content, comment on, sometimes just play games with the camera on, and generate enough footfalls to get advertisement revenues enough and have an income from that on social media, in public spaces, in digital spheres. Now, in the process of describing all that, notice how I started with apps we are all familiar with. Using Google or social media platforms like Facebook or Instagram. And we started from networks of communication to networks of economy to those of political economy, touched governance, the entanglement of political economy, economic theories, very obviously Marxist theory about surplus value, but also other scholars like Louis Althusser or Michel Foucault, if you squint. You've been hearing the word interdisciplinarity a lot in the previous session and in this one, I think, so far. Meaning making cannot happen other than in very interdisciplinary ways when we look at digital cultures. And what I just did is a good example of that. The conventional rigidity of disciplinary boundaries has to be taken as a heuristic premise. The moment you actually engage with an example, a situation in a particular context, you can't maintain the so-called purity of disciplines. Which is why in the few theoretical premises I will outline, you will see a play of sociology, economics, history, literary studies, media studies, bits of computer applications. I have deliberately picked examples that are not rooted only in literary studies, so that irrespective of your own discipline and research interests, and we know that we have so many different ones in this room, you will hopefully have some themes that you can relate to. The first one of those would be the network society that I mentioned. Then there is the notion of the public sphere that political scientists and philosophers here must be aware of. Jürgen Habermas's discussion of civil society is rooted in the framework that individuals must continue performing their duties as parts of the broader socio-economic machineries, institutions. Outside these formal working hours, there should be spaces. He mentions cafes and salons, where debates, discussions about shared public concerns should take place. That, for Habermas, is a good way for the state machinery to stay informed about the public sentiments and concerns without compromising on the functionality of the state. This idea of a public sphere can be applied to study social media spaces, digital journalism, and the debates around them, even YouTube channels commenting on particular kinds of social behavior. Sometimes I don't watch shows, I watch the recap or the review of shows. I'm sure you do too. That falls under this definition of a public space like this. Now, Nancy Fraser's critique of the public sphere on the grounds that being bourgeois, it becomes exclusionary, and the coinage of what she suggests instead as subaltern counter-publics may be used to study the existence of media fandoms and fanish activities, especially in resistance to, sometimes in active contradiction, reappropriation of mainstream representations and hegemonic normative attitudes, especially around gender and sexuality. Another way of looking at digital social interactions may involve extrapolating Benedict Anderson's work on what he termed the imagined community. While the concept is rooted in Anderson's political historiographical work, where he examines the way in which nations are formed through shared, homogenizing, standardizing practices, aided by modern print capitalism. The nation state of political science is constituted by territory, governance, population, and sovereignty. For Anderson, moments like the publishing of newspapers and magazines that created a particular moment in modernity, when despite never having met each other and having socio-cultural differences and differences in lived experience, people from different parts of the political state started identifying with each other, started sharing a sense of shared identity, and literally imagined themselves into existence as a community. It is important. Now, I'm not suggesting that this is the perfect or ideal definition. In fact, scholars like Partha Chatterjee have criticized Anderson by stating that in post-colonial nation states, print modernity and similar devices were not universally shared. Therefore, this way of understanding nation formation cannot apply to such communities. But this group, or at least not apply to them entirely. But this idea of a group of individuals who may have no lived experience or sense of identity in common, but manage to imagine a shared commonality and create an imagined community above and beyond concrete qualifiers like similarities in language or region, may be a very useful tool in looking at digital book clubs, fan communities, gaming communities, patrons of Nisha Madhulika's recipe channel on YouTube. If you're not aware of it, She is one of the biggest content creators, one of the most successful ones from India. Commentators on digital news reports. The possibilities here are endless. People who are interested in a particular kind of content end up being parts of not just formal WhatsApp groups or Facebook groups, but imagine communities where people sharing that similar interest, it can be that one game, that one kind of cuisine, that one particular kind of entertainment, Korean drama in South Asian contexts outside Korea, for example. I'm assuming there are at least some BTS fans or fans of idol dramas in the audience, are very good examples of digital imagined communities. The next one, actor network theory, is another concept that you may have heard. Excuse me. Developed by Bruno Latour and John Law, ANT attempts to analyze and understand the relationships and interactions between human and non-human entities within social and technological systems. At its core, ANT challenges traditional approaches that often separate human actors from non-human entities like technology, objects, institutions, and others. Instead, ANT treats all these elements as actants or actors that contribute equally to the shaping of social reality. The theory emphasizes the idea that these actors are all interconnected and form a network of relationships that influence each other's behavior and roles. It involves concepts like actance, as I just mentioned, translation. ANT suggests that interactions between different actants involve processes of translation, where meanings, interests, and capabilities are negotiated and transformed in order to achieve cooperation and alignment. Black box refers to the process by which an actor's internal mechanisms or complexities are simplified and made opaque in order to facilitate interaction with other actors. Network, again, but in a slightly different way, where network is the dynamic web of connections between various actors. These connections can be stable or transient and can influence how power, information, and agency are distributed within the network. And symmetry, where human and non-human actors symmetrically, meaning that they are all considered equally important in shaping social cultural processes of meaning making, functioning, challenge traditional human-centered perspectives in social theories. The term actor network itself highlights the interconnectedness of actors in. The network is not simply a metaphor, but a way to describe the actual relationships and interactions that shape the world. Now, again, I'm not trying to idealize the actor network theory. I'm just saying that it has been one of the more popular theories to study digital cultures, digital interactions. Because ANT often sparks controversy and debate due to its unique perspective on agency, causality, and the role of non-human entities. Critics argue that it can sometimes lead to a flattening of distinctions between humans and non-humans and overlook the role of power dynamics. While these have been some of the more relevant theoretical frameworks used to study digital problematics, because of our limitations in time and scope of exercises, typically we start with examples, we bring in discussions, but because of the size of the group, we can't do that. And I wish we could. I want to focus a little more on a particular theme and trace it using particular works, rather than only signposting some concepts and theories very briefly, like I have just mentioned in the list that you can see on that slide. So I will give you a slightly detailed example of what critique or research analysis may look like in one aspect of digital cultures using the works of primarily Michel Foucault. Parvati mentioned in the introduction that I work in identity studies, and digital subject formations is something I'm interested in. Now, what is the notion of subjectivity, and how may it be applied in digital contexts? As I was telling one of the conveners, it is both very long for a presentation, but very short for the theme. And because of the size of the group, we can't make it more interactive. At the same time, I'm aware that I'm speaking to a very mixed group. If you're familiar with the theories of subjectivity, I request you to bear with me. If you haven't heard the word before, that's perfectly fine. And I need you to be a little patient with me too. Who or what is a subject? Very simple. The word subject can be used in the way it is used as a grammatical concept. In a sentence, the subject is the actor or doer when you think of subject and predicate in that sense. The subject is the one being referred to by the verb, right? In that sense, the subject refers to someone who has agency, who can act, who is even unique or individual, particular, like a proper noun. But we also use the word subject in a very different way. When we say he subjected himself to the rules, we mean that the person submitted, surrendered to a set of rules. This may sound like the exact opposite of the first meaning, in that there is an utter absence of agency. The person is acted upon by rules, law, or governing authorities. In a sentence like, the king loves all his subjects, there is this element of passiveness, where subjects are not the actors, are not agentive in that relation, in that action. There are two things to note here. First, note how I'm using the word subject to refer to an individual. However, the word subject is different from the word self or the word individual, even though they are clearly referring to the same entity. Although the two are sometimes used interchangeably, the word self does not capture the sense of social and cultural entanglement that is implicit in the word subject. A subject is located within cultural networks, relations. Self refers to the more interiorized understanding of an individual. Second, when describing the individual, scholars typically respond in very polarized ways. Either there is the assumption that the individual has no freedom, or it is assumed that the individual is absolutely free to be original. They don't coexist for most of the philosophers and theorists who have worked on the notion of selfhood. For Michel Foucault, they coexist simultaneously. In fact, they constitute each other. In the very act of subjecting oneself to a rule or surrendering oneself to a set of norms, one gets to, in that very same act, express or articulate one's own individuality or subjectivity. That is the crux of Michel Foucault's understanding of the word subject. Why discuss this? The focus on the self as the center of both lived experience and of discernible meaning has become one of the, if not the defining issues of our contemporary modern societies. As subjects, therefore, we constantly have across different disciplines huge discussions on, are we free? Do we have autonomy? Jean-Jacques Rousseau saw the individual as originally self-sufficient and whole, for example. And I'll only mention him, not because there aren't others, but we don't have the time and we won't have the time to go into the depths of the others. He believed that human beings were born free and naturally good, but the complexities of culture and society led to a state of confusion and prejudice. Oh, I'm so sorry, Srimoidi, I think we are in the place to go to the next slide. If you can see Michel Foucault on the screen, we are in the right place. So this notion of an authentic self corrupted by society is an enduring obsession within modernity. It has permeated modern culture and thinking, from countercultural movements to self-help advice, encouraging people to be themselves. There is therefore a tension between the individual's autonomy and the constraining effects of power and social structures. Incidentally, if anyone here is interested in the history of the internet, you will find a lot of these resonating themes in those accounts. The internet emerged in a situation of absolute state control and moderation. A huge part of it was funded by the US military. And yet, or perhaps because of it, from its very inception, there was a huge tangle of government involvement, but also other elements like the anti-war protests in America against the Korean and Vietnam wars, catalogs like the Whole Earth catalog that was proto-Google, according to most people, interesting developments in science fiction, and a host of subcultural and countercultural movements, like the hippie movement, which believed that the true self exists somewhere out there, outside the oppressions of societal expectations. I'm summarizing a huge and very complex social movement in 2 sentences. You're welcome to look it up. The genealogy of digital societies we live in are fascinating sites of applying these frameworks. The same contexts may be equally read by what appears, at least initially, as the polar opposite of this. A Foucauldian scholar may look at these same premises and historical conditions and interpret them in a completely different way. As I mentioned, Foucault's subject is subject to social norms, but also in the process of subjecting oneself to these norms and power relations, claims subjectivity, expressing the unique or individual iteration of that normative practice. Think, as an example, the word selfie and how it has not existed in our social vocabulary till pretty recently, right? Now, to take selfies, you are choosing to voluntarily sign up, agree to the terms and conditions of a particular social media platform. It can be Instagram, it can be Facebook, Snapchat, whatever your choice of it is, while surrendering particular rights like, privacy, agreeing to the fact that these big interfaces are going to record and analyze your data, probably sell your data to others, you're clearly ceding control. You're clearly giving up or surrendering certain rights. It is not the only place where you're ceding control. It's not like you woke up one day and you decided to take a selfie. Selfies are a shared social moment. Other people take selfies. Initially, you may have judged them, loved them, been too shy to take them. But now it has entered our social vocabulary so ordinarily, in such a commonplace way, that taking selfies is normal. You have chosen to obey, to follow that trend of taking selfies. So when you take a selfie, including the angle, the direction where your camera is placed, how you're smiling, what hand gestures you're making, you are both submitting to pre-existing norms that are acting on you. You're willing to submit yourself to them. And yet in the very act of taking that selfie and sharing it with others, you are expressing yourself, expressing a version of yourself or articulating a sense of your own individuality. That is a very good way of understanding how Foucault's talking about subjectivity. And as you may have seen from the example itself, why we need to talk about Foucault and Foucault's notion of subjectivity within digital cultures. In the process, for Foucault, power isn't a centralized, top-down, coercive mechanism owned by big social institutions like the government. Obviously, there are institutions like the government and others that have power, but in ordinary everyday life, power is decentralized and productive and is rooted in power relations. Foucault literally calls them the micro capillaries of power. And he says that the individual subject is an effect of power. When he says effect of power, he is referring to the way in which power relations, this attitude about how selfies are trending, or platforms that coordinate with where your Instagram account is clearly taking your data and selling it or sharing it with your Amazon account that is sharing it with your WhatsApp advertisement notifications. And they are all working and you have willingly submitted. Nobody has forced you or locked you up in it. You have willingly submitted yourself to these broader power structures, right? And because you have submitted to them, when you're taking that selfie finally and sharing it in social media, in that act, you're an effect. You're creating yourself as a subject. You're entering this discourse of selfie culture. or Nijoshi, as Bengali came up with, which is fascinating because typically it's a very interesting sign of how deeply it has permeated to become a word that needs its own Indian language version. It can no longer just pass off with borrowing from English, right? In that very act of doing that, you are therefore creating yourself as a subject who has entered the discourse of selfie culture or who is now participating in the discourse of selfie culture. And this is an effect of or a result of these power relations that are not just that big company, but also that social trend of taking selfies. Right? In the process, just a minute. Yeah, I think bahar khana aa gaya hai. In the process, there are a few keywords that we will go through very quickly and very briefly. First is power knowledge. You understand power in this way. The next step is saying that knowledge is not neutral but is shaped by power relations. Power creates knowledge and knowledge reinforces power structure. Again, the selfie example can be used to study this. That this knowledge of taking a photo of yourself in this way is attained by you, is acquired by you because there is a power relation that is currently telling you taking selfies is cool. If you're not doing that, you're missing out. And in the process of using that knowledge, you're reinforcing that power structure. Second, power as productive. Whenever we talk about power, whether in very political science contexts or in other similar situations in sociology or economics, typically there is this assumption that power is repressive, it controls, it forces, it's coercive. As opposed to that, in a situation like this, because we are looking at these micro capillaries of power relations, was challenging that to talk about how power is productive. Productive here doesn't necessarily mean productive only in a good way. Productive here refers to the fact that power is producing particular kinds of subjectivities. Another word that is very important in studying Foucault and Foucault's understanding of subjectivity is biopower, which refers to the way in which life, ordinary citizens' lives become the objective or the primary subject of governances, especially in late capitalist modern. Power operates and manages entire populations. If you're familiar with words like security and disciplinary technologies of power, security would involve vaccination, health, other aspects of governmentality. Words like governmentality, power, biopower refer to the ways in which entire communities are managed, behave, submit to, express themselves in terms of the power knowledge systems. This involves not just explicit control, but also the shaping of subjectivities and behaviors. Again, the emphasis on it not being repressive, coercive, forceful, threatening, but a situation where subjects willingly submit themselves, obey, adhere to norms, conform to a particular expectation. Right? Foucault also explored how individuals and groups resist and subvert power structures. He believed that resistance is not outside of power, but rather a part of the same dynamic. Dominant, hegemonic, mainstream forms can co-opt resistance or resistive movements. A very easy example of that is studying the history of denim jeans, and how it becomes this particular moment in fashion where it's appropriated as something cool. So wearing toned denim jeans is a sign of being fashionable, or having a particular kind of panache, and completely ignoring its history as this very hardy, cheap, rough material that can be used as workers' overalls. And that therefore played a role in a lot of political movements, asking for workers' rights, better resource accessibilities, social mobilities, and instead now has only become something about high fashion or high culture. Foucault has prominently used the word disciplinary power to talk about this way in which a subject willingly subjects themselves and in the process express their own subjectivity. Sorry, that's way too many subjects in one sentence, but that's the easiest way to put it forward. Foucault has prominently theorized the disciplinary nature of modern institutions, practices, and discourses, where discipline gives rise to individuals by categorizing and labeling them within a structured hierarchy, driven by ideals of efficiency, productivity, and standard norms. And this is peculiar to modernity. Identifies diverse contexts in which these disciplinary methods have emerged, including educational institutions, prisons, medical facilities, and asylums. These methods lead to the creation of what Foucault calls the pliant or docile body, individuals who can be subjected to control, utilization, transformation, and enhancement willingly. The metaphor often associated with Foucault's idea of disciplinary power is the panopticon, an architectural concept for a prison featuring a central tower. You can see that in the image, featuring a central tower overseeing surrounding cells and buildings. In this design, inmates within the cells are observable by the observer in the tower, while the prisoners remain unaware of the observer's presence. The panopticon metaphor represents an ongoing, anonymous, and pervasive surveillance and power that operates across all levels of society. Importantly, while the panopticon design might not have been physically implemented, it was unsuccessful. It embodies the notion of continual and comprehensive control present in various facets of social existence, where it doesn't matter whether that central watchtower is occupied by somebody or not. Because it is there and because any inmate in that cell is aware that there is a possibility of being watched, they immediately modify, control, obey, behave in a particular way. If you think of the way in which CCTV cameras work, as I was just telling my class, you will realize that we use almost the same principles, where it doesn't matter if we know whether the CCTV camera is on or off. And it doesn't have to be about big things, big crimes. Even small things like spitting, littering, walking a particular way, feeling vulnerable in particular ways, immediately has us checking a CCTV camera and immediately feeling like we are under surveillance, we are being watched in good or bad ways. Because also notice how CCTV cameras are put up and we choose to put up with them for our own protection, for safety, for surveillance so that any emergency can be addressed immediately. Now, how does all of this relate to digital cultures? Due to the prevalence of digital and various surveillance technologies, the realm of social interaction has been extensively influenced. Modern technologies have expanded the range of observation in public spaces, creating possibilities for tracking and documenting individual behaviors. Everyday monitoring, often facilitated by digital tools, I mentioned a Fitbit, has been normalized as routine practice, entwined with the construction of one's identity and physical presence. Numerous analysts have pointed out that the substantial volume of digital data generated by security devices, gadgets, and applications, which is stored in digital archives, can be employed for various surveillance purposes. The information collected when individuals utilize the internet, along with the content they create and share as a part of their online engagement, is subject to scrutiny by various entities. These include digital developers, companies, as well as individuals, friends, and followers on social media. This type of surveillance and data collection in the realm of online technologies has become a pivotal aspect of the digital information economy. Digital surveillance, I think we can move on to the next slide, where we see different versions or iterations of the word surveillance. Often referred to as surveillance, transcends being solely a tool of government security agencies, as you know. It has become an integral component of the commercial landscape and is integrated into sectors such as healthcare, law enforcement, and education. Empowered by the internet, a global economy centered around surveillance has emerged, forming a complex network of surveillance systems and practices, where nations collaborate to provide digital surveillance tools and strategies while simultaneously using these systems to monitor each other. The true extent of espionage activities fueled by access to digital data has only recently been brought to light through revelations like the Snowden file. Scholars examining the social, cultural, and political aspects of surveillance have identified various modes of operation. Put simply, surveillance involves the act of overseeing or observing from a higher vantage point, typically concerning those in authority monitoring others, utilizing technologies like CCTV cameras, radio frequency identification chips, and biometric monitoring. Digital surveillance is carried out by different entities as a part of security. This also extends to surveillance practices conducted by businesses aiming to capitalize on the monetary value of user-generated digital data. In certain instances, individuals are conscious of being monitored through these means, while in other cases, surveillance remains covered. Digital surveillance can take on a coercive nature, serving to penalize or openly regulate individuals or societal factions. Think of the shaming or calling out or public name calling videos that are sometimes shared in domains of Twitterati and netizens. Again, new coinages that did not exist in our vocabulary. On the other hand, it can also be benevolent, functioning as a means of security or governance aimed at enhancing efficiency, fostering economic progress, or ensuring physical health and safety. Think of the, again, pacemaker beating in somebody's heart, and of course, how it needs to be monitored digitally from a distance. Digital surveillance technologies distinguish themselves from earlier methods of observation through their widespread presence, the extensive range of data they can amass and store, their potential durability, and the privacy concerns they raise. These forms of surveillance operate by digitally recording individuals' actions, storing this information in repositories, and utilizing algorithms to process and manipulate the data, enabling predictions about people's behaviors. Unlike previous modes of surveillance, these surveillance records possess a much longer lifespan and the ability to be disseminated across time and space. On the back of it, we have concepts like liquid surveillance, as discussed by Bauman and Leong, underscoring the way digital data circulates within surveillance systems. Drawing from Bauman's exploration of liquid modernity and Leong's body of work on societies under surveillance, this concept highlights the practices and technologies emerging in contemporary times and how they have led to surveillance being all-encompassing and unconstrained. If you have watched any detective films, especially based in the global north, America typically, you will notice that there are CCTV cameras in ATMs and roads, which means that even if they are discrete CCTV cameras, part of discrete networks, owned by discrete companies, they can all feed their loops into each other and you can practically map every step of somebody's life. Liquid surveillance represents the pinnacle of the trend towards monitoring and assessing both human and non-human entities. As a result, surveillance has extended its reach into numerous domains where it once held minimal influence. Digital technologies have intensified pre-existing forms of surveillance or given rise to novel variations like the surveillance assemblage that takes shape through the collection and aggregation of diverse types of digital data, forming a dynamic structure that constantly evolves as more data are generated. Human bodies and identities are deconstructed into distinct components as digital data, only to be reassembled through this process of reconfiguration. Think of what happens and why you get to see that YouTube advertisement, or the kind of different utterances at work, at play, with your friends, in private, that you're saying, doing, that your phone or any other smart device is recording, sometimes covertly. Communities that were once exempt from routine surveillance are now subject to the dispersed and adaptable technologies of digital surveillance. Now, the concept of panoptic surveillance, drawing from Foucault's metaphor of the panopticon, inspired by Jeremy Bentham's ideas, have been extremely influential. Panoptic surveillance involves non-coercive disciplinary power, where a minority watches over a majority. The panopticon, an illustrative prison design, uses the, as I mentioned just now, the same principle that CCTV cameras now use as security measures, where uncertainty about their monitoring leads individuals to adjust their behavior accordingly. Then there is the term panoptic surveillance, a variation of panoptic surveillance, specifically characterizing the use of data to prohibit or exclude certain individuals and groups from particular regions, countries, public spaces, employment opportunities, social services, insurance, and more. You know about the geopolitics or geo-locking systems that are in place, or how you can't access certain websites in certain locations. The term panspectric valence, also known as data valence, encompasses a wide array of digital technologies and diverges from panopticon by relying more on digital sensors and signals rather than human sensors like vision to generate substantial data sets for surveillance. Coined by De Lambda, the concept predates the widespread availability of personal computers, the internet, and social media by almost 25 years. And yet, here we are. Finally, sousveillance, practice of watching from below, has gained prominence alongside the rise of digital technologies that provide ordinary individuals with tools to monitor others. Sousveillance not only involves citizens observing each other, but also entails monitoring figures of authority. This practice is often associated with citizen participation, citizen journalism, and political transparency. It is argued that the democratization of surveillance empowers citizens to observe and expose instances of abuse of power by those in positions of authority. Certain scholars have also used the concept of synoptic valence, that's coined by Doyle, as the opposite of panoptic valence, and a more recent concept known as social surveillance, to define the interactive monitoring of each other that takes place on social media platforms. Social surveillance can be seen as a facet of participatory valence, encompassing voluntary involvement in observing or being observed by others. Participatory valence is an inherent aspect of using, where users agree to their data being gathered under the terms of their platform use or other technologies like loyalty programs outlined in terms and conditions and privacy policy agreements, or the acceptance of cookies. You must have encountered some of these. It also pertains to individuals engaging in self-monitoring practices. Now, one of the reasons why I have outlined this, or I have drawn your attention to this, is to show that the proliferation of these words conceptually is as important as the differences in their meanings. And all of them borrow from, use, are central to was understanding of surveillance and disciplinary power, and also our ordinary, everyday, very high profile to very low profile, depending on whether you're watching a James Bond film or you're just messaging a friend, digital interactions. In the process, knowledge, as Foucault talked about it, if you remember, the entanglement between knowledge and power means that social authority is inherent in the production and dissemination of knowledge. Power constitutes knowledge and is in turn constituted by it. And digital data can assume the role of socio-material objects within this framework. Digital data objects play a role in shaping our perceptions of identity, physical presence, connections with others, precise knowledge about our decisions, inclinations, and even our entry into various services or environments. This highlights the dynamic interplay between data and society, emphasizing that data is not a neutral or independent entity, but rather a socially constructed and influential or crucial element that contributes to our understanding of the world and our place within it. Some of you may be thinking of a word like ideology, and you would not be wrong. Traditional media held control over the content they disseminated, but possessed limited knowledge about their audience. In contrast, new media not only incorporates content from their audience, but also possess intricate details about their audience's characteristics. This perspective aligns with the Foucauldian approach. It shifts focus from solely repressive aspects of power relations, typified by the conventional model of power, where authorities coerce, dominate, subjugate individuals or groups, to the subtler, dispersed, and often voluntary aspects of power in everyday life. Power, according to this view, both enables and limits capabilities and choices. Numerous digital society scholars have delved into the broader political implications arising from the use and influence of digital technology. These discussions often highlight how these technologies align with the neoliberal political framework. Neoliberalism, prevalent in what is imagined to be prevalent in primarily developed countries, centers on concepts like the self-reliant individual who shapes their own opportunities, the supremacy of market forces and competition for optimal outcomes, and reduced state involvement in supporting socio-economically disadvantaged individuals. In the neoliberal view, the ideal individual is self-regulating, assuming responsibility for their own fate. People are encouraged to be self-reflective, treating their lives as ventures requiring entrepreneurial investment of time and effort. Neoliberalism has a profound influence on sociological and critical humanities theories in response to digital technologies. Thinkers, commentators have recognized how the surveillance and monitoring capabilities of these technologies can be harnessed to promote self-management and competitive behaviors over state intervention. If you have heard of apps like Healthify Me or meditation apps, self-help apps, or mental health support apps, the concept of presumption from where we initially started to where we are now talking about has this diversity, this range that is simultaneously converging, where individuals both consume and produce content and can be understood by drawing from Foucault's concept of selfhood practices involving self-care and improvement. Through digital technologies, people learn about their surroundings and the individuals they share their lives with. Platforms like Instagram and Facebook facilitate the exchange of intimate knowledge between participants, surpassing previous levels of interaction. One of the biggest advantages of the internet in our lives is that it amplifies, it makes access easier, it makes access to different kinds of resources easier. We wouldn't be able to host an FDP of this kind with so many participants without it. These technologies allow friends and family separated by distance and time to regularly engage. They construct a chronological account of personal experience. You may have run into memorializing accounts because there are users on Facebook who have started passing away, and enough of them have now passed away. Very interesting point to note, where Facebook or Meta has started this added feature of memorializing accounts that are archived in particular ways. Scholars exploring the intersection of social media and global knowledge economy argue that digital entrepreneurs and companies are adept at selling products by leveraging consumer community enthusiasm, automating and widely disseminating word of mouth, and utilizing algorithms to suggest future purchases based on past behaviors. Remember that mention about what you wanted to buy. In this context, the commodity is not solely the physical item being sold, but also encompasses information about the item, its consumers, and the communities that form around consumption. These communities generate value by producing information, innovative ideas, and valuable experiences for participants. I assume, I don't know how familiar you are with the idea of fandom, but think of fan events, fans crowdsourcing things together, to fans buying particular kinds of merchandise to make somebody successful. These are the more obvious examples of it. And especially in South Asian fandoms and fan communities, these are very prevalent cultures. A simultaneous discourse of participatory democracy and the capitalization and restriction of freedom operates on many social media platforms in the process. Critics argue that these technologies are part of a vast network of systems that monitor, measure, and regulate individual behaviors rather than broader social processes. Social media are often depicted as promoting individual creativity and freedom through opportunities for presumption, but there are clear limits on how this creativity and freedom are allowed to function. Some scholars draw on political economy perspectives to highlight limited access, discrimination, and exploitation inherent in digital relationships and technology productions. Marxist critiques of digital technologies persist, particularly in the work of scholars like Furcht, who discuss the exploitation of prosumers on platforms like Facebook and the challenging working conditions paid by paid workers in the computer hardware and internet industries. This brings us to the end of this segment, the second and the biggest segment, about how to theorize or talk about research in digital humanities. We have one final segment left, and it is the shortest. You have been, I'm hoping, an amazing audience. So we are near the end. Bear with me for 10 minutes more. I'm almost done. We are ready to go on to the next slide about digital academia. Now, all that I have spoken about subjectivity and surveillance, access and amplification also apply to an increased digitization of academic. You can't resist how higher education workplace, particularly how teaching, learning resources, academic publications, and the evaluation of academics' performance have all moved online. This digitization is a result of a broader trend of the knowledge economy, where digital technologies play a significant role in the production, dissemination, and evaluation of academic work. I think we'll move on to the next slide. If you can see online presence of academics, we are good. This involves, obviously, online presence of academics with the digitization of teaching materials, academic research, publications, presence extending to university websites, academic journals, online marketplaces like Amazon and Google Books, libraries and platforms where their work is referenced. Academic persona. Universities often create standardized formats for academics' online profiles, detailing their research, teaching, and qualifications. Third, it involves online representation by others. Much of academic online representation is shaped by others like academic journals, publishers, review websites, and other academics referencing their work to contribute to how an academic is being perceived online. Along with these things, what comes immediately is the question of control and autonomy. Academics may have limited control over how their work is presented online, mediated by institutions, publishers, platforms. The online representation of academics may not accurately reflect their entire body of work or their full range of expertise. Digital evaluation and monitoring is the next element that comes in very strongly in this, where digital technologies are used to monitor and measure academics' performances, including metrics such as citation counts, downloads, and online engagements. I'm sure we will get a notification about how many people are live streaming this. And all of this together finally reaches to the final point that we need to keep in mind, and that is knowledge economy. The digitization of academia is a part of a broader shift towards a knowledge-based economy, where information and expertise are central to economic growth and development. Digital transformation of higher education has reshaped the way academics' work is presented, evaluated, and disseminated. While this digitization offers new opportunities for visibility and impact, it also makes questions about control, accuracy, and the role of institutions and intermediaries more urgent. The trend towards open access publishing, driven by mandates from public research funding bodies in various countries, supports the idea of public humanities. Academic engagement with digital media for professional purposes include activities like blogging, tweeting, curating social media pages, editing Wikipedia entries, using platforms like academia.edu, ResearchGate and LinkedIn, creating podcasts and producing YouTube videos. Higher education is also expanding into online formats, not just through universities' accredited courses, but also through massive open online courses, MOOCs. MOOCs, offered by prestigious institutions since 2012, provide access to education for people worldwide, overcoming geographical and financial barriers. And private organizations like Udemy or Skillshare are, of course, trying to capitalize on it. And questions arise about MOOCs' impact on higher education, including their quality, retention rates, sustainability, and potential to replace traditional learning methods and accreditation models. The concept of the digital scholar has been explored in depth by experts in education technology. Academic guides like Social Media for Academics, a practical guide by Neil, exist, and that itself is an indicator in the first place about how platforms such as WordPress and Twitter serve as accessible spaces for academics to share ideas concisely, sometimes more effectively, with a broader outreach. I don't know if you remember, but in the previous session, one of the slides that was shown showed somebody acknowledging the role Twitter has played in their academic career. Platforms like academia.edu, ResearchGate, and LinkedIn, along with university profile web pages, offer academics various ways to present information about themselves. Curation and sharing platforms such as Delicious, Google+, SlideShare, Pinterest, Scoopit, Pearltrees, Bundler, Paperly, and Storify, as well as referencing tools like Mendeley, SiteYouLike, and Zotero, enable academics to easily collect and present information. Importantly, these tools also facilitate sharing information publicly online. SlideShare allows users to upload presentations, and referencing tools help gather lists of references on specific topics for sharing. I'm hoping that you have used at least one, if not some of these tools, or similar tools that do similar kinds of work. Now, what does this mean, this trend or this increasing kind of practice that we see, this becoming increasingly more and more universal, standardized? Even seemingly minor practices like assigning titles and keywords to one's articles, books, or chapters, as well as the choice of words in abstracts, have significant implications now that most academic content is digitized. These choices can greatly affect how accessible a scholar's work is to others. Certain academics have taken the notion of open scholarship to an even more extent by combining the idea of academic gift economy with the principles of innovative academic publishing approaches. Gary Hall, a cultural and media theorist, has notably developed the concept of the open book through his website and other writings. Hall is affiliated with the New Cultural Studies movement, which explores the performative aspects of cultural studies scholarship and challenges traditional notions of academic publishing, which can be very elitist, gatekeeping, refusing access beyond a particular extent. One of Hall's distinctive endeavors involves the book Media Gifts, for which he has shared material on his website bearing the same title. He characterizes it as, and I'm quoting him here, the working title of an open, distributed, multimedia, multi-platform, multi-location entity that is as similar to and yet as different from the traditional or conventional understanding of book. We'll move on to the next slide very quickly. And again, I'm nearly done. What are the questions we need to keep in mind in this very dynamic, very quickly changing? I'm referring to Deborah Lupton, and she lists these questions. First, what happens when academic research goes open and is presented in less formal formats? Is a blog or a tweet, even as we cite them, as good as a published paper? Second, what are the implications and effects of new ways of measuring academic output and impact via digital technologies? You must have heard of high index or Scopus index journals or impact factors, which are digitally calibrated. Will academics, many of whom already report feeling overworked, underappreciated, and stressed, find themselves under further pressure to engage as digital academics? How will MOOCs and other attempts to render education more accessible via online technologies affect pedagogies, funding, workloads, and employment levels in the higher education sector? And how will the conventions of academic publishing respond to open access initiatives? Surprisingly, and I am ending with this, there is a lack of research that delves into how academic practices become habitual and ingrained as tacit knowledge, whether involving digital technology or not. Similar to research on knowledge workers in the digital era negotiating boundaries between work and professional life, personal life, traditional notions of time, space, work, and leisure are being disrupted by the adoption of digital technologies. You may have heard of the Great Resignation or moonlighting, and academia obviously falls under these. Academics and other knowledge workers are experiencing this shift. The use of mobile devices like smartphones, laptops, and tablets enables constant switching between work and personal activities, blurring the boundaries even in situations like being in bed or waking up. Disciplines centered around studying social practices such as anthropology, sociology, media, and cultural studies find it challenging not to observe social life continuously. Digital media platforms amplify and facilitate these observations. Given that digital devices serve both personal and professional purposes, their mobility and constant internet connectivity mean that work can be present at any moment of the day. The permeation of work into personal spaces and times is becoming increasingly common, influencing how academics and other professionals manage their daily routines and engage with their work. And I think I will end here. So you remember the three broad aims or objectives that I identified. We have covered those and highlighted at least some of the more interesting or important themes or concepts.
Thank you, Tonisha. I guess I'm audible. Okay, so it's a truly engaging question, and it may be allowed to use a controversial term, immersive experience. Okay, and you brilliantly talked about digital culture theories, theorizing the digital culture, especially using Foucauldian, discourse analysis, particularly digital surveillance, and finally you talked about the digitization of academia. So it was a beautiful presentation where you incorporated three, which we could hear more and more because some of your things were truly like I didn't expect some of things like the cyborg thing that you talked about. No, we have seen cyborgs in cartoons, but in reality, in this digital space, how to go about it, and of course the code space. These are some of the mind-boggling issues, and also the concept of presumption, how you have linked it with the digital humanities exercise and digital culture, truly engaging. Now, a host lot of questions have come. So many of them have congratulated you and they are very, very impressed. But I would just ask, it's impossible to take up so much questions because then we will not be, it will go on forever. I'll take some of them. Now, one question has come from Noyon Mary Tom, who had asked, how do you study digital archives of photography? Doctor, now will you take all the questions together?
Let's go by one because otherwise they'll
Okay.
be too diverse and it'll be very difficult to
Okay,
pull
fine.
them through. Thank you, Riddhi. You're very kind in your compliments. I'm also very grateful to everyone who has responded in the form that way. Because of time constraints, we couldn't be as interactive as I like to be in my classroom. We had to pack in a lot of material in a very dense presentation. So thank you for just putting up with it, being curious enough to stick around for it. Now, I'm so glad that this question has come up because the moment we start talking about politics of archiving, we have to talk about politics of representation. And digital archives can play a very big role in breaking questions of access, gatekeeping. I'm assuming that the person who has asked this question is aware of works of people like Susan Sontag when they talk of regarding as opposed to looking, when they talk about photography, or Jean Berger. And it is very, very interesting to see how these conversations are mutating, morphing into new iterations over digital open access archives, and how that is changing concepts of what deserves to be in an archive, how is value invested or cultural capital invested in objects. So there is a huge, I had to cut away the archiving part because we didn't have the time for it. But yes, it's entirely possible. There are a lot of people doing very good work. I will be happy to share links of their names and work.
Questions from Devomitra Banerjee. Is there any connection between digital humanities and economy? And will digital economy have a psychological impact on humans? And is privacy a real danger? Is it true? So she asked a lot of, questions.
Privacy is a mostly imaginary concept right now. I'm sorry. Covert surveillances are invasive. I don't know if you've noticed, but some people have started taping the camera on their laptops or are very afraid of using their phones around themselves. Sometimes I have talked to students in class, and on the basis of what the lecture was, their Google feed has popped up certain word associations. So surveillance is a very real concern, and there are huge debates happening about to what extent is it permitted. Should you be allowed to at least control the way your data is going to be used? There's a lot that can be said about it. Again, I'll be very happy to respond to it in greater detail. Like any other socio-cultural activity or disciplinary silos, economics is not outside the domain of digital interactions. In fact, we have an entire course on digital economics that is being taught to postgraduate students, where again, economic or conventional economic themes, concepts, theories are being brought in to study digital behavior, but also digital behavior is affecting, inflecting the conventional understandings of economics as we have it. And that holds true for other disciplines as well. Did I miss out anything?
That's it. Now, there's a question from Prakruti Bhatt. She is asking that that through developing technology and digital culture, we need to rethink our ideologies regarding what we hide and why we hide in the first place. Very, related to the thing that you said. And then she asked, do you believe that due to the developing digital technological cultures, the foremost moral, ethical, and professional duty of academics would be to train or teach the students skill which will help them in adapting to and existing in the digitized culture and societal system?
That is a very important question, and I'm glad that it was raised. There is no one single answer because there is no one single context in a situation like that, right? So I would always, I am trained in cultural studies. So one of the things that I regularly do is tell everyone about how meaning is mediated through cultural processes. If there is an objective, impartial truth out there, is it at all accessible to us? Is a huge question. And obviously, a stance like this resists a very positivist, objectivist, rationalizing stance. Typically, people extend these attitudes when they talk about scientific disciplines or technological spaces, and we need to be very careful about that. Beyond that, I'm sorry, it's very difficult to keep track of the questions, but yes, insofar as politics of representation or subjectivity have always been crucial themes, they have definitely continued within digital cultures, and the ethical boundaries are very blurry. I don't know if you're a fan of science fiction, but if you watch films like Ex Machina and many similar things where the discussions of should we recognize artificial intelligence as sentience? Do they deserve the same rights as human beings? Do they freak us out? Are they uncanny in bad ways? These are becoming very important questions, again, drawing from the word cyborg. And there is no one single answer. There are deliberations. We can look at context sensitive, particular discussions. And that's the only thing that we can do. We can't have a single homogeneous answer for this.
True. Mathivani has asked, how can we ensure that digital technologies are used in a responsible and ethical way in the study of English literature?
Well, you know, it was such a bad experience teaching communication English courses during the pandemic, right? Because everyone would cheat. And that defeats the entire point of a language exercise. So, again, just as we have always had problems of plagiarism, cheating, unethical practices, sometimes this can look like hate mongering or hate speech, taking very problematic or very rigid stances and blurring that thin line between right to expression and not indulging in hate speech that is actively harming somebody. These have always been very crucial concerns that are center stage in humanities because our syllabi, our research methods, our theories, all of it involves these questions in a very big way. And that, of course, continues within digital discussions of it. One thing that digitality has done is, of course, amplify everything. You know, you can put anything in Google. You don't even need a subscription to turn it in to see if something is plagiarized. So that increasing transparency can help. But also we have to be also aware of new forms of literary and cultural studies with things like electronic literature, what Shamabroto is researching on. And what does it mean to talk about the open book that I referred to of Gary Hall, where how do you understand an ethic of authorship, of not stealing, of not indulging in malpractices if the content is meant to be transformative? So I think that's how I'd respond to that.
A very intense question from Bulo Cano, and this person has written, is DH really interdisciplinary? As I understood, DH is a reading of the data, that is data which is in the digital storing, not limited to only this of literature in humanities, etc. What makes it interdisciplinary? Even if the literature of all disciplines are stored as data, and DH studies this data, it doesn't really make it interdisciplinary. And he or she has also said that even if DH extends to the study of digital culture, does it really become interdisciplinary or it becomes a separate discipline like philosophy? And then commented that if DH is taken to be interdisciplinary, then it is not a discipline in itself. So then DH merely seems to be humanities scholars and academics doing the usual things on digital devices, including the internet.
That's a great question. I'm glad that it was raised. There are different ways of answering it. One is, what are the kind of boundaries that you're setting? How are you defining disciplinarity in the first place? Is digital humanities because it is looking at digital interactions alone? Are there other disciplines that are looking at digital interactions and therefore should automatically be called digital economics, digital psychology, digital literary studies, things like that? Or, as I mentioned in the three broad ways that I mentioned in the very beginning, we are looking at whether we are looking at socio-cultural practices, data harvesting, which takes a very technical or quantitative turn in terms of studying patterns of social behavior. The methodologies of all of these make possible exploring not just scientific facts or problems, but also socio-cultural problems and situations. I would not agree with you that, you know, digital humanities is just humanities people looking at it, because we have things like, on one hand, we have things like digital caste studies or critical caste studies, digital race studies, these amazing works which are blurring the lines between theory and praxis within academia in a very real way. And sort of pushing them in the digital or the non-digital side would be a very reductive way of looking at it. The second part of this involves the fact that I think, at least given the kind of work I have been doing, and if you've noticed, we talked about very ordinary shared experiences, but they were data, they were networks of communication, they were networks of socio-cultural hierarchies, they were identifying practices, they were political practices. Drawing lines between those different things in that same network through that same act is very difficult. So for me, digital humanities is inherently or intrinsically very interdisciplinary, because it also can only work at the intersections or borders. You're not just extrapolating or borrowing a theory or technical tool. You're also locating yourself at that border of, say, English literature and political philosophy within a particular blog or within a particular Twitter thread. And that practice itself requires that interdisciplinary border dwelling. So if you ask me to comment on interdisciplinarity as a concept itself, I think digital humanities performs it in this way, and therefore, yes, it is interdisciplinary. But at the same time, definitely holding its own grounds as a discipline. That is interdisciplinary. I'm sorry, that sentence has to sound the way it does.
Now, Himanshu has asked, what are some popular societies, clubs, or conferences of digital humanities in India?
Well, digital humanities is an emerging domain in India, but at the same time, there have been some excellent scholarships. I don't know if you've heard of Dharti or Digra, which are the Digital Humanities Alliance. Look up the full version of them. I'm sorry, I don't remember. There are amazing centers like the Center for Internet Society and Culture in Bangalore, CSDS in Delhi, unless I have messed them up, have brought out amazing readers like the Sarai Reader on Media and Crisis. So even though we don't have centralized organizations, institutes are beginning to host or beginning to form, alliances are beginning to be formed. But at the same time, already we have a very rich body of work that has happened on digital humanities in India. I would ask you to look up names of books at this juncture. I'll be very happy to recommend some of them and scholars working on them. The formalization of institutions will take a little more time and may, mutate in different ways. It will be very interesting to watch.
There's another question from Dr. Madhurima Mukhopadhyay. Can we consider geotagged photos, which are so much part of the proof of our academic outreach, archiving, metadata authentication? Now, can it be seen as a manifestation of power?
Absolutely. I think so, yes, because think of the way in which Google Maps or Google Earth and mapping or tracking your every location works. On one hand, you're allowing it that access. That is the very interesting thing about Foucault's understanding of power within digital humanities for me personally, because this idea of, yes, it is covered, it might be secretive, is it sometimes extremely undemocratical? Yes. But at the same time, you are often consenting to a lot of the violations that are happening, or a lot of the mapping that is happening are there. I would urge you to look up this very interesting documentary on true crime, if true crime is something that you would not mind, called Don't Fuck with Cats, or the Case of an Internet Serial Killer. It's on Netflix. It's a fascinating text, and it's impossible in situations that do not look at geomapping and surveillance in the way in which it is so commonsensical nowadays.
Sonisha, there are a host lot of questions. It keeps coming, but I think the organizers also told me that one more question. So if later on you'll have the Google form, you can answer it later. So the last question is, could you please suggest a reading list?
Oh, definitely. There are, as I said, some very good material has come up. What I can do is, I am obviously writing all those emails to you, so I'll be very happy to send an email. I would also like to acknowledge here that some people have put in amazing open access sources. Some of them were mentioned in the previous session. The instructor in the previous session has curated a list like that. I'll be very happy to share them. They will reach you by email.
Thank you so much, Tonisha, for answering after a really exhaustive session to answer all the questions patiently. There are many others, so I would tell you, please don't be disheartened, and I'm sure Tonisha is going to answer them over the email. So
Yes.
over to Srimohi.
I'll do my best. I promise.
Thank you, Riddhi, and thank you, Tonisha. What a lovely session. Even though the first day was we know what it was for us as coordinators, but the lecture itself,
Certain things are not in our control.
no, but what Shamo did was fantastic. He laid down the foundations, and he posed, I think, the most pertinent question as to how we can, identify our digital humanities. And today, I can kind of build the pillars around that foundation. I think we're building a house pretty well here, and you not only problematized the entire discipline, but also I think you hinted at the ways by which we can also kind of ride through those problems and arrive at certain destinations. So, wonderful, Tonisha. You just congratulate yourself at a very, very well present. I hope I kept up with the changing of slides. I may have
No,
messed
you
up.
did great.
Anyway,
I didn't have too many slides. So you were.
anyways, so I think for those who have joined us, they will definitely be looking forward. And we will also again extend a warm welcome to all of them to return for our third session, where we will try and build up a roof, I think, and go forward with our attempt at understanding the concept of digital humanities. So the feedback form has been, I think, shared in the chat box multiple times. Please fill that out as your attendance as well.
I will also like step back from being the speaker and go back to being the very
Yes.
quickly. We hate that it can't be interactive, but as I have mentioned in the emails, the response has been so overwhelming, and we have had to refuse so many people, hundreds of people, that we wanted to make it as big a classroom as possible, but that will not compromise on the interactive nature of any classroom, as it should be. So I will do my level best to respond to the questions. Even after the session, please feel free to use the Google form. I will also share a tiny Google form. We have just started doing that, I think, and share another Google form where I will create another very short exercise and just send it to you. And those who have registered, please take the half an hour it will take to fill it in, because that is the only way in which we can manage interaction here. And believe me, we are as interested in listening to you, and the questions have been so amazing that we do want that interaction. So despite our limitations, we will hold on to those. Look out for those. Those forms will be in
Yes,
your
that is
hands.
Tonisha's department, so she'll take care of it. I suppose, I believe, because she's really worked hard so far in doing all the technical stuff, because we're not at all as tech savvy as she is. But
No,
thank you,
no, I'm
Tonisha.
still surprised myself. I'm not as tech savvy as other people are. So,
Anyways, I think
but
I owe you an official thank you for being our speaker for the day, and an unofficial thank you for being our coordinator as well. So we will meet again next Saturday, same time. We will start 5 p.m. sharp, and hope to see all of you with us for our third lecture, which promises to be, building up on what we've already have established. So I think we can end today's session, Tonisha.
absolutely. Thank you so much for joining, everyone. We are humbled by
Yes.
how you have held on to this. Honestly. Thank you.
Thank you.